Hello and welcome. My name is Daniel Burke, and I'm an independent candidate, a LaRouche independent candidate for U.S. Senate in New Jersey. I'm really glad that you're joining me for this conversation tonight, for this dialogue, and for a thesis to advance to you about why Tulsi-crats should help Trump become a successful peace president. So, okay, this is my last campaign meeting of the campaign. And I'm on the ballot across New Jersey. So I'm looking forward to seeing how everything turns out. But I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce my daughter and my wife. This is my daughter, May, and this is my wife, Aska.
Hi.
And thank them very much for everything that they've done. Thank you, May. So this is why we have to do something for the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. See you guys. Good night.
Bye.
Okay, it's bedtime. So thank you for that. Okay, but I'm here to make a case for you, and there's let me just be straightforward. There's a couple of specific ideas. Number one, I think that Tulsi voters should take the remaining days of the election and should mobilize for people to vote for President Trump, because we have got to defeat the imperial oligarchy that Biden and Harris represent, the Obama third term. We have absolutely got to defeat it. And it's not possible to do protest votes. Actually, I don't even really mean to put it that way. This is not anything like the situation with Ralph Nader, for example. And I don't really think that anyone's doing that. It's not some kind of a threat on that basis. What I'm saying is that there's a historic opportunity now to beat that whole nexus. And it's going to be shaped by what happens over the course of the next days. It's going to be shaped. What's going to be shaped is also what that presidency will be if Trump does succeed. And it'll give us an ability to actually foresee a new and better paradigm for the world, one other than the system of geopolitical insanity, of regime change wars, of domination by the financial elite, globalization destroying the lives of workers in every country, and this kind of cynical, pessimistic outlook which leads into fascism. If you go, I found this. As soon as the Trump campaign succeeded, as soon as the Trump presidency came in, I was going to the Trump voters. Since early of January 2017, I think, we went to one of these really cold rallies out in front of Trump Tower, which is not that far from here in Manhattan. In fact, one of the young men that I met on that day is on this broadcast right now, and he and we met with a couple of friends yesterday for several hours and discussed what we're going to do for the future. Because I was going to these events and trying to mobilize Trump voters to consider, what's actually at stake here. That they are being targeted by Steve Bannon. They're being targeted to believe that China is the ultimate enemy in the world. They're being, that everything bad about China is true. They're being targeted by the free marketers to think that the key thing that we can do is deregulate, and that the stock market is the best indicator of how the economy is doing. They're being targeted by Wall Street to go along with a policy that's going to destroy the country. And yet these people are optimistic because they look at Trump and they see someone who they think to themselves, this guy could change everything. And that's true. That is obviously true. If you look at his actions over the past 4 years and the incredible, bitter attacks upon him, completely based on lies, based on CIA, MI6, FBI operations to try to remove him or even to kill him, it's because this guy has the potential to do good on a historic level. And that's actually something that my friend Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who's the founder of the Schiller Institute and the widow of the late Lyndon LaRouche, she had to say. At the very beginning, she pissed off a lot of the people on the sort of so-called left who have worked with the LaRouche movement over many years by saying if Trump could make a better relationship with Russia and China, then he would go down as one of the great leaders in the United States history and therefore in universal history. And this was such a high-minded outlook for Trump, or such a high ceiling, that people were rather aghast. But I think if you look at it, that potential is still absolutely there. And there's a lot of professional cynics who want you to think that, well, because of all of the negative things that Trump's administration has done, or that Trump himself has done, that therefore this potential does not exist. But those people, they're just, I can't even believe it. They have a belief that human beings are a burden on the world, that humanity is sort of just incapable of changing the conditions of our system. And if you listen to the people like Caitlin Johnstone or Aaron Mate, or the pathetic Oliver Stone, who have stood up against Russiagate, and now they're saying, pick Biden. Well, not Johnstone. Johnstone's not saying that, but the other two are. They're emitting a certain kind of assumption about the future, which you cannot submit to. Because the fact is that things have radically changed. And I will point to one major essential quality, which is that, my daughter, May, she's 2 years old. When she is 6, she will watch human beings walk on the moon. She's going to watch Americans walk on the moon as part of the Artemis program, which Donald J. Trump signed into effect in March of 2017 with Space Directive 1. This is the JFK commitment to the future of mankind, and it is represented in the man that everyone says is a racist jerk and all these other things that people who are on this discussion know are fraudulent, really, that these are inventions of the neoliberal media, as you can see from their remarkable efforts to censor anything that would expose Biden as being a corrupt, son of a bitch. When look at what Biden and Obama have been involved in: war, famine, disease, neo-Nazi coup in Ukraine, human, slavery taking place in Libya because they bombed the place with humanitarian bombs and just destroyed any potential for that nation in this period. Trump is saying, let's put mankind on the moon, and he's acted upon it. And I think people have to actually take a view of this and consider what it means. Most people, they really have a negative conception of what space exploration means. But what it means is scientific and technological breakthroughs become the mandate for the nation. They become the commitment for the nation. Because you cannot go to the moon. You can't go to Mars in 3 months without nuclear rockets. You can't build a base on the moon, a manned base on the moon, which, according to a GOP tweet this week, which blew me away, is a top priority of the Trump second term. You cannot do that without making enormous advancements which are shared with the civilian economy. They make an impact on the world. And that has been clearly the effect of, the Apollo program. Every dollar that went into the Apollo program yielded 10 in economic output. So if you look at the president from the standpoint of his potential, you will know you got to go with this. Under Biden, you're going to get the same thing as Obama. Obama destroyed the manned space program, literally, massively defunded it. And when he said, go to the moon, been there, done that. That's a direct quote. Go to the moon, been there, done that. He said about thermonuclear fusion, we don't need any newfangled fusion. Do you think you're going to get something different from Biden? You're going to get a vicious austerity regime imposed from the top by a policy of really mass depopulation coming from the global financial oligarchy, which is what you're up against. And I am asking you to join me in creating a successful movement over the coming years to actually shape the policies of the United States such that we can form mutually beneficial policies of economic development with Russia, China, India, and many other nations. Our goal should be in the immediate term and in the short, the coming years, really, to get a total transformation of the system by which nations relate to each other. We cannot allow the lunatics at the Atlantic Council, we cannot allow, the Russiagators, the unelected bureaucracy, MI6 in particular, to continue to dictate the terms of our relationships to Russia and China. We can't let Miles Kwok and Steve Bannon walk in here and act like they're going to decouple the United States from China, or Fat Pompeo, pull off his greatest schemes. If we're going to stop that from happening, then there has to be a powerful movement, not merely anti-war, but pro-development, where you think of what are the positive transformations of the world strategic system. What are the positive transformations in the basis for our relationship to other nations, to great powers, that are required right now. So that's fundamental in what I'm asking you to do, not merely to think about the potential of Trump, but to look within yourself and say, what's the potential that I have to affect the famine that is happening in Africa right now, where 30 million people are now at risk of dying of starvation. So I would like to show you a short video, about 3 minutes long, from Lyndon LaRouche, who is my political inspiration. He passed away in 2019 in February, in which he identifies what's that real enemy that's behind the Biden, Harris, Obama camp, and also Pompeo and assorted figures like that. What's, like Bolton, of course, what's the real enemy and what do we have to do against them? So I'd ask you to please give your attention to that. And then I have just a couple more things to say, and I would like to hear what you have to say in response.
And the British have always handled us nicely by getting us into wars in places like Asia. This is the way the British run the world. The British Empire runs the world through warfare. The same way they got imperial power, by inducing the silly nation states of Europe to go to war to each other in the so-called 7 Years' War. And the leading nations of Europe went to war against each other for 7 years, while the British stood on the sidelines and encouraged the process and laughed. And then on February in 1763, in a Peace of Paris, the British Empire was declared as the empire of a private company called the British East India Company. And the British East India Company took over what had become the United Kingdom, and has run it from that time to its equivalent, the present day. The British East India Company, of course, went into bankruptcy at a later period. There were changes made, as under Victoria, and so forth, but the principle remained the same. And since that time, we have had an empire of a maritime characteristic, that it was originally based on the maritime power of the Mediterranean Sea, and later spread to the Atlantic Ocean. A maritime power which had created a control over the use of money. And the basis of this power was money, the control of money as a form of imperialism. All European imperialism, including British imperialism today, is not based on a landed territory. It's based on an international organization of the control of money. Now, this money is actually controlled by private interests, by individuals who form concerts of private interests who set up the control of money, its creation and management. And nation states are subsidiary to this international control of money. The British Empire, which evolved out of this process, is nothing but that. It is not an empire of the people of the United Kingdom. It is an empire of an international consortium of these types of interests whose control over money is used, by use of the control of money, to control nations.
So when Trump talks about the globalists, whether he has a full conception, as Mr. LaRouche laid out there, that's what we're talking about. We have, since March, produced about $6 trillion out of thin air to back up Wall Street and the City of London financial markets. And that intention has been completely at odds with the actual requirement, which is to create tens of millions of new productive jobs in the United States as soon as possible. Jobs that would actually create the next 25 years, create the future, and 50 years and beyond that, which is what the Artemis program represents. It's a matter of thinking about what are the powers of the human mind that we can advance and develop, such that we seek to solve the big problems of the world. So I feel like there's a lot more that I could say, but I want to keep things really brief and hear what other people are thinking, because I am saying something direct. I want you to get up and organize for a Trump victory. I think that it's completely up for grabs. I mean, you see how incredibly successful the brainwashing has been coming from the neoliberal media. You see how many people are afflicted by Trump derangement syndrome and have been for 4 years, but who believe in the most ludicrous propaganda, like the idea of that Biden came forward with, of Russian bounties paid to the Taliban in Afghanistan, which was completely disproven. Or think about even what Biden said about North Korea. He said, I would meet with Kim if he agrees to denuclearize before we meet. Now, that is a total non-starter. That's identical to Obama's policy, which was known as strategic patience. And why is it a non-starter? Well, particularly because Kim saw what Obama and Biden did to Gaddafi, which, of course, was the whole means by which John Bolton spoiled the peace process by specifically saying, we might have to give Kim the Libya treatment. So these fraudulent beliefs are at the verge of ruining our entire nation. Because if we continue down the road laid out by Obama 3, there's no hope at all. I mean, now, I don't mean to say we won't keep fighting, and I really think it is possible Biden would win, which would be extremely dangerous and scary. But we're going to have to consider that our actions over the next final period could make the difference in the history of the United States. Because under a Trump presidency, in which he fires Gina Haspel at the CIA, he fires Christopher Wray at the FBI, and dear God, I hope he fires Mike Pompeo, then you have a new policy direction possible. Trump is actually negotiating on the START treaty now with Russia, despite the extreme negativity that Aaron Monte has about this process. It's quite clear Trump wants it. He's actually sent personal White House representatives to Damascus to have conversations with the Assad government. That was quite surprising to me. In other words, not from the State Department as controlled by Mike Pompeo. And if you would agree with me, or if you can accept my thesis, or if you can discover it yourself, that there is a major distinction between Trump and his Pompeo-Bolton aspects, or not aspects rather, but the people who are trying to so-called advise him and run his policy into the ground. If you agree with me that there's a distinction, then I think it's incumbent upon you to feel empowered to do something about it. Tulsi has left the door open. She clearly gave you the opportunity to make a decision about the president. She gave, of course, the very, very, very minor endorsement of Biden, and then shut up about it for a long time, and then made certain interventions over the past several months, whether on ballot harvesting, on the absolute necessity of freeing Julian Assange, of pardoning Edward Snowden, and even, the other elements which everyone knows that she brought up, like the Cuties movie. She is making a certain intervention, But I'm asking you to go further. I'm asking you to say, I am responsible for shaping this future policy of the Trump administration and the United States. And I'm going a little longer than I wanted to, but I'm going to say just two more things to conclude. Number one is that Mrs. LaRouche, and Diane may have more to say about this, who's a friend and a collaborator and a leader of the international LaRouche movement, she has really been focused on the idea that if you want to shape Trump's future policy, you have to get him now to acknowledge the requirement for emergency food aid to Africa to address this incredibly dangerous famine. And I'll give you an example of something that puts this into context. There is a speech that was made by Trump's appointee to the World Food Program, which of course is the UN's food aid organization, which provides food aid to, I believe, at least 60 million people across the world, and possibly much more, especially in this period. They have a $5 billion deficit. That's what the 30 million person problem comes from. There's enormous numbers of people who are at risk because of the deficit, because of the economic crisis that has erupted in the midst of the pandemic. Here's what David Beasley had to say. He's a former Republican governor of North Carolina. He was an early endorser of President Trump. He says, quote, "This is a pivotal moment in history, and it will either be one of our worst or it will be one of our greatest. Despite the racial, political, religious, economic, and cultural divisions facing the U.S., we have an opportunity to come together in pursuit of an extraordinary goal. Food has long been one of the great peace builders in history. Maybe the peace and reconciliation we have been seeking starts with this." Imagine if Americans could wake up and say, our nation and our U.S. military, which has been doing nothing but terrible things in Africa, is finally going to do some good. When I have a friend, Bill Curran, who passed away, and he about almost 8 years ago, it must be 7-8 years ago, and he passed away. He was in his 70s. He had been a member of the LaRouche movement for over 30 years. And he told me, when reflecting back on the period of John Kennedy and the fight against war, famine, and disease as the true enemies of the United States, he said to me, when I was young, the United States was doing good all over the world. We didn't even know how much good we were doing because there was so much happening. He said, you have to fight for that. And I'm strongly committed to that. You know, why reject the cynical assumptions about the nature of the United States as an institution, and instead look into the actual quality, the actual devotion of people like Alexander Hamilton and Benjamin Franklin, who was a great student of Confucius, by the way. It was a devotion to doing good in the world on behalf of mankind, and that the advancement of the United States belonged, had its right to exist because we did that. So that's what I'd ask you to consider when you're thinking about what you should do immediately and what we should do over the coming years. I'd like to introduce my friend Diane Sayre, who is running for U.S. Senate in New York. She's a LaRouche independent.
Hi. Thanks,
Hi, Diane.
Daniel. Hi. Can I be heard?
Yes.
I guess so, right? Okay, good. Well, I'll be very brief. I think I might categorize what I would like to say as you ain't seen nothing yet. And I am speaking to you from the West Village in New York City, and can tell you that the city is in a free fall. It looks like a controlled demolition. And I'll just give a couple of examples, and you'll see, I think, where I'm going. As of August, 87% of the restaurants that are still open, and thousands of them have closed, could not pay their rent, either all of it or a partial payment. There are business buildings and office buildings where every single tenant has decided to walk out of their lease because there's no way that they're ever going to be able to pay this. And the situation is that if a building owner has a mortgage, the mortgage was valued, the building was given a value based on what people were going to be paying for rent. This is why you see these peculiar things if you're looking at apartment rentals or things like that in New York City, and I imagine it's every city, where they don't lower the rent. What they say is, we're going to give you 2 months free rent at the same rate. So in effect, or 3 months free rent, they're taking off 25% from the cost of the rent, but they have to put it that way because if you lower the rent, it lowers the value of the property, and then the owner of the property has to pay the bank the difference in what's owed. So they won't lower the rent. And this is just like our derivatives bubble. That is the entire so-called economy, this great stock market that unfortunately President Trump keeps bragging about because it's a real Achilles heel. It's just a bubble. It's all based on the presumption of a value as long as no one ever tries to cash in their bets. Because as soon as you try to actually cash it in reality, just like as soon as you try to rent out office space or an apartment in reality for the rates that people can actually pay in this crisis, the entire house of cards is going to come crashing down and wipe out everything. There is no solution to this crisis in the current terms, the way the economy operates. If you think about the people who've been out of work, think about performing artists who've been out of work now for 8 months. Suppose they get back to work and the landlord demands 9 months of back rent. Can they pay it? But will the city expect the landlord to pay the property taxes? Well, what if the landlord doesn't pay the property taxes? How will the city pay for sanitation or police or schools or many of the things that are paid by property taxes? The entire thing is completely out of whack. It just has to be written off through the first law of Lyndon LaRouche, the reinstatement of the FDR Glass-Steagall Act. That will wipe out this bubble, and then what you're going to need is trillions of dollars of credit from a national bank or the Treasury. The Federal Reserve could be nationalized, for example, and turned back into a national bank that our elected officials have control over and which is transparent, which is beholden to the interests of the American people. Now, Biden, if he exists at all, and maybe it'll be Kamala Harris before he's even in office for a few weeks, is completely owned by the financial interests who are about to lose everything. And like what happened in Germany in the Weimar Republic, after they printed all this money and made the Reichsmark worthless, then it was relatively easy to install Hitler, to get people to go for fascism. And what you see in the United States, what's been happening, I mean, think of it. Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and Twitter froze his campaign account, locked him out. Facebook and Twitter say that they're not going to allow the president to convey certain messages, matters of policy to the American people. Think about the New York Post, which broke the story on Hunter Biden's laptop. Trump calls it the laptop from hell. The New York Post is the 4th largest newspaper in the United States. They're still locked out of their Twitter account, even though Dorsey testified today that that wasn't true and he had let them back in. That's actually not the case. He actually just lied to the Congress. Now, beyond that kind of police state, what are the implications of this kind of collapse? Well, if you're not willing to scrap the bubble and start over, the implication is that you're going to go to war. You're going to have a major war, and you're also going to allow millions of people to die. And that's not only in Africa and Southwest Asia, where you have the famine that Daniel referenced, but that's right here in the United States. And that's what we'll see. That's what's happening in Europe. Think about the refugees trying to get away from the pirates in Libya, or being used by the pirates, anything to get away from slavery in Libya, making their way across the Mediterranean. And people from the European Union come running out and chase them back into the water. Think about what happened to the refugee camp in Greece, where the people living in the camp burned it to the ground because it was so horrific, and they thought that might be a better way to take care of it, or get something else done. So what you have with Kamala Harris and Biden and what's behind them is something that can only be described as pure evil. I can't guarantee that if we successfully manage to get Donald Trump reelected, which is urgently necessary, that we would be able to audit the intelligence agencies, which I know he would like to do. General Michael Flynn wanted to do it. I can't guarantee that he's going to go for Glass-Steagall and a credit system. I think the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin is terrible. Navarro is terrible. But what we've seen about Trump is that he has a willingness to fight, and that he actually likes people, which unfortunately, the last few presidencies we've had presidents who really don't like people. They don't like the American people. They don't like Obama. I don't think he liked anyone. I always used to like to turn off the sound when you watch him speak, and he's always speaking like this, looking down his nose at everybody. And Bush was dumb and had Dick Cheney, otherwise known as Darth Vader, running the show. So you have a president who likes the American people, who likes the country, and who knows that if you have a thermonuclear war, it's the end. And he's willing to fight on that. And that gives us a tremendous opportunity. And as Daniel said, people should mobilize anything that you can to get President Trump reelected, but don't be naive and think that the battle ends there. We have a job to do to rally and to educate the American people to mobilize for the policies that are necessary, because in this crisis, there's no such thing as simple survival or short-term survival. We have to turn over the chessboard. We have to change the rules of the game. That requires the United States forging an unbreakable relationship with China, the two largest economies in the world. The only way you can beat this quadrillions of dollars of derivatives held by the City of London is that the US and China have to be allied for a new system. Russia, India would be good. Japan might be likely to join. LaRouche called for a four-power agreement, US, Russia, China, India. That would be good. It's urgently needed also to deal with COVID, to eradicate poverty on the planet. And I think that Americans should have the idea that we can be a force for great good on the planet. So I would think in terms of the campaign, Trump's slogan, Make America Great Again, make America great again and good again. And that requires a huge mobilization of the American people. So I'll just stop there, and we can open it up.
Thank you very much, Diane. Okay, so I hope that I get some people who are ready to come forward and speak up, and speak up on video. We'd like to see your face and respond to this challenge that Diane and I are trying to make. And it's I just looked at Twitter a little earlier, and Michael Tracy, who's been a big supporter of Tulsi Gabbard, comes out and writes a long article about how he didn't vote for anyone. I think that it's very challenging. Most of the people I met through Twitter here who are involved with Tulsi's campaign, but there is just enormous cynicism, enormous pessimism, just the feeling that there's practically nothing that you can do but sit back and complain and criticize and so forth. And I'm asking you, and Diane is too, don't give in to that. Don't give in to that idea. Seek out that which motivates your sense that you as a human being have a role to play in the future of mankind. Good, we have my friend Jose on. I want to show one last thing, and then we'll go to Jose. Dave, could you show the two slides that I have? So this is something from Lyndon LaRouche to kind of put forward to you a hypothesis of what do I mean when I say look for the good, think about what you can accomplish. This is from The Substance of Morality, 1998. These issues of truth and justice are associated empirically with tests of humanity's increased power over the physical universe per capita and per square kilometer of the Earth's surface. The increased development of the average newborn individual, the increase of per capita power, the maintenance of the increase of those improvements in demographic and productive characteristics and so forth, are typical of the evidence by means of which we may know that changes in knowledge for practice are in accord with the Creator's intent for the laws of the universe. Next page. This accords with justice, as justice means a more adequate participation of each individual life as a world historical being. O life so dwelling in the simultaneity of eternity, a mental life thus situated in the further development of the condition of all mankind. Thank you. Okay, so that's kind of a mouthful, but what Mr. LaRouche is trying to put forward is essentially what I'm saying. You look at Twitter, you look at the sort of the mainstream pundits on the left, the anti-war people and so forth, and they do not have an affirmative conception of what we should do. A lot of people are anti-war, they're anti this, they're anti that, but they need an idea of what comes next. And that's the issue of backing Trump. It's not because you're saying, I like Trump better than Biden, although I sure hope you do, but rather because you're saying, we're out to create something for the future. And that means we have to get rid of this insane oligarchical crap that Biden reflects. We have to think through, what would make us proud to be Americans again? Now, not like, what is it that we wish weren't happen anymore? No, don't do that. Think through what is it that we could actually accomplish. Right now, China is embarked upon a policy which is increasing the power per capita of people. It's increasing the potential of every newborn individual. It's called the Belt and Road Initiative. They're building mass infrastructure across the world. They're building power plants. They're building high-speed rails. They're building all types of things. And they're being criticized massively by the neocons as empire builders for doing this, or neo-colonialists, even though colonialism was a matter of mass murdering people and stealing everything that they had and installing your puppet state. That's not what the Chinese are doing. They're doing something we should be doing with them. We should be working together with these nations, these major nations, to define a pro-development policy for the entire world. And specifically for those countries we've been such, terrible, enemies of, really, like Afghanistan. We're going to have to work together with Russia, China, to look at Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and the wars. You can't end them, and also with North Korea. You cannot end these wars without the mutual work of those three nations and also India, and then specific policies of building up the countries. So let's go and hear from Jose, and I hope that other people will speak up as well. Hi, Jose. How are you? Hi, we can't quite hear you. Are you muted? Yeah? Are you miming?
Go for it.
There we go. Hi. Yes. Sorry. The host had to unmute me. It said that I couldn't unmute myself, so I had to mime my question. Did you get that, or do you need me to repeat it?
No, go ahead and say your question. Also, because I realize that people who are on the phone may not know how to unmute yourself. You have to, or to raise your hand. I believe you hit *9 to raise your hand. Is that right, Diane? Yeah. So
Yes,
if you're on the phone, then you can hit *9. Go ahead, Jose.
All right. Perfect. Great. Yes. So I was just on an AMA with Mr. Binney and Mr. Wiebe, Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe. And I wanted to just relay to you what they said in regards to what people should do. We ended the AMA with a question that was, regardless of who's in the office come November 3rd, or whenever we find out about the election results, regardless of who's in the presidency, regardless of whatever happens, what do the American people need to do? What do they need to do? And so Bill's response was that, one, democracy is not a spectator sport, that they have to continue to call out people who are doing them wrong, that you have to continue to speak the truth. No matter how many times it takes, you have to continue to say it, and you can't let them bury it. Don't let them bury the truth. And of course, he said, vote Trump, because he's a very big Trump supporter. And Wiebe said that you need to find somebody who's going to listen and recruit them and get them to start saying the truth as well, because it's the only thing we've got. And he was saying, the same thing as Mr. Binney, that democracy is not a spectator sport. People have to be involved and active and hold their elected officials accountable for what they're doing and what they're going to do. And just one last thing, towards the end, right now I'm getting messages from people who said they tried to submit questions to our AMA, but were met with an error, which is kind of funny because I tried to edit the post to let people know we're done, and I also got an error. The moderators also got an error. And now when we finished, all of these questions that came in as duplicates are now filled with the sub. It's as if, it's just kind of weird that, all these people couldn't get their questions through up until we finished. So with that being said, I just wanted to relay that to you, let them know what they said, and maybe if you wanted to respond to that or comment.
Well, I appreciate that. Let me say that for people who don't know, that Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe are people that I've collaborated with as well. They are NSA whistleblowers who proved that back in the year 2000, the NSA under General Michael Hayden chose to go with bulk, unconstitutional surveillance of the American people, as opposed to the program that Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe had worked on together named Thin Thread, which would have protected the constitutional rights to privacy of the American people and still shut down the incredible problems of terrorism and criminality and so forth. And what they did was they left. And they actually left shortly after 9/11 because they knew that, and they've said this again publicly recently, 9/11 could have been prevented, but was not. Now, Michael Hayden, who enacted that, is part of the whole process that Biden reflects. And Bill, people know, has been a major advocate for Julian Assange's freedom. He was an inspiration for Edward Snowden, Bill Binney. Really brilliant man and a great patriot who cares about the future of the country. He has been extremely clear about this question of Trump. He was challenged by a person who felt that Trump was really not trustworthy because of the war policies that have been implemented under Trump. And I'm not here to say that Trump has done everything right. By no means. You look at the Syria strike based on lies. You look at the inhumane sanctions that have killed enormous numbers of people, innocent people that have been implemented under his presidency. Those are very bad things. But Bill pointed out, if you want to get a sense of what Trump's personality is, remember what happened long before Soleimani, which was another error imposed especially by Mike Pompeo, when an American drone went down, supposedly in Iranian airspace. And Trump was asked, should we strike back? And he said, according to all reports, how many people would die? And they said 150 people would die. And he said, I'm not going to do that. Even though John Bolton and Mike Pompeo were egging him on and saying, this is deterrence, this is really going to make them know you're strong. Trump said, I'm not going to do that. It's not a strong thing to kill people unnecessarily. And I think that's really important. Remember also the Syria strikes were done in a way that people didn't die, and the strike on Iran was done in a way that, after the pushback was done in a way that people didn't die. And all of these types of things are indications of his potential. I'm not going to defend all of the bad things that have happened under Trump and the bad decisions that he's made. That's not the point here. But the point is that he has a potential to do the good, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have no potential to do the good. And I can't really believe that anyone thinks that they would. So I see a couple of remarks here from Alan Myron, and then my friend Brandon Brophy wants to say something. So Alan, I really appreciate your contribution here. I'm going to read aloud what you said. I could not vote for Trump because of all the reasons Tulsi listed in her censure resolution. Number 1, violating the War Power Resolution and Article of the Constitution by carrying out acts of war without congressional approval. Number 2, illegally and unconstitutionally using U.S. military forces to occupy and pillage oil-filled reserves of Syria, a sovereign nation. Number 3, recklessly enabling President Erdogan of Turkey to invade and occupy northern Syria, and conduct ethnic cleansing of Syrian Kurds. Number 4, continued support for Saudi Arabia's genocidal war in Yemen that has caused death, suffering, and starvation. Number 5, recklessly abandoning nuclear agreements and treaties like the INF Treaty with Russia and the Iran nuclear agreement, thereby increasing the risk of nuclear war, nuclear proliferation, and war with Iran. And then you conclude your statement by saying, I do recognize that Trump is the lesser evil when compared to Biden. So I think that I want to put it in a sort of a situated as much as I can. It's my view. You don't have to accept this, but I think that if you investigated it were true. It's my view that those problems that you listed, which are all very major problems, some larger, some less, and I really agree with Tulsi's disagreement, or strong censure and criticism of all of these. And I will say that they are manifestations of the fact that we're living in this British imperial system to which Mr. LaRouche referred. I would say that my view is that it is impossible for any president to be successful, even a very well-intentioned one, and I think that Trump is quite well-intentioned. It is not possible for them to succeed unless they they work with really leaders of Russia and China to transform the entire world strategic system. Because if you don't change the conditions of new Cold War, which Tulsi Gabbard deserves incredible credit for speaking to, as when she challenged Ashcroft, I think it was Ashcroft, the defense secretary at the time, and asked him how many people would die in a nuclear war with Russia. And he sputtered and sputtered, and she said, no, I know you know what these actual figures are. How many people died? She deserves enormous credit for pointing that out. But how do you change that? You cannot overcome the crisis between U.S. and China, U.S. and Russia, by being anti-war. You just can't do it. You can't be anti in a situation like this, because we've come up to the end of the road. We've concluded the sort of the lifespan of this oligarchical system run out of the city of London and Wall Street. You're just out of it. Now it's Silicon Valley. They're trying to just squeeze blood from a stone. It's not going to work. You're going into the largest financial crash in history unless something is done. And it is not so simple. It's not so simple that like someone can say, okay, well, I'm a president. I'm going to come in. I'm going to fix everything. You cannot simply just come in on a national basis and address what's going on in the United States. You have to, according to the forecasts of Lyndon LaRouche, which I think are quite absolutely accurate, you got to have the president of China and the president of the United States sit down and make an agreement about how we're going to change the relationship between major nations, between many nations. Because the alternative to war is not the absence of war, or so to speak, peace is not the absence of war. Peace is a shared mission. It's inherently economic, yes. It's cultural. It's a dedication to the future. And you cannot achieve that without major agreements about how we're going to industrialize the world, which we're never going to do with the Green New Deal. I want to be really emphatic for people, because this is another major disagreement I have with Tulsi. I'd like her to abandon this outlook, which is essentially fraudulent about the nature of human economy. You're not going to industrialize Kenya by making coal power plants illegal, which is what Mike Bloomberg is trying to do. And I know people don't support Mike Bloomberg. You're not going to industrialize the developing sector where so many people die of dysentery, cholera. They die of completely outrageous causes. There's no reason for this to happen. They die of hunger. When we have more than enough food in the world, that's murder. That's actually genocide. There's a beautiful and heart-wrenching book that's been written by Jean Ziegler, who's actually worked with the World Food Program and the Food and Agriculture Organization for many years, the Swiss humanitarian, who's done a book proving every child that dies of hunger dies because of a genocide. It's a murder. Now, that system has itself got to be transformed. And that's what I spoke about Tulsi with when I met with her at the 9/11 Families press conference back about a year and a half ago, or a year and a few months ago. I spoke to her about a policy to industrialize, to develop, to reconstruct Syria and Yemen. And this is a policy written by my friend Hussein Askari, who's the Southwest Asia coordinator for the Schiller Institute. And he has discussed all of the train systems you got to build, all of the places where you're going to build new power plants, the places where you're going to actually introduce high technology like nuclear power. Where are you going to create new ports, new connections so that Syria can be connected to the 7 seas that surround it? That's a policy that he's actually introduced to the government of Syria, and also a similar one to the government of Yemen, which would situate their future over the next 25 to 50 years within the Belt and Road Initiative of China and the positive actions of the United States that we wish to implement. And this is what I really want to convert Tulsi to begin to discuss with the American people, is what are you affirmatively going to accomplish? So that's my way of answering you, Alan. I know it's not, essentially, let me restate it. Everything that you said that Tulsi has criticized Trump about, I agree. It's really a disaster. My hypothesis is that it's up to us presenting a positive solution and fighting as vociferously to separate Trump from Pompeo as we do to attack Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that we can do something about it. I don't think it's possible to do something about it by, treating Trump and Biden as equivalents. That's my case that I'm trying to make to you. Okay, now I see there's a bunch more remarks, but I'd love to invite Brandon Brophy to come in and make a comment.
Hi. If you're trying to get through to people and what the major difference between Trump and Biden is, it's that it is definitely more on a cultural level than a political level. Like the culture that Biden representing right now is mainly urban cultures, people in the cities who, quite frankly, you really look at what they say, they hate their degenerate culture. They absolutely, and it's mainly because their culture comes from they're in a constant state of absolute fear mainly because of our economy is based on debt. And the way that a debt economy works is it allows people to buy things for higher prices than they are worth. And you do that enough times, eventually people get the houses and the homes and the stuff that they would have already had anyway, despite the dead economy. The only difference is everything's way more expensive. And then for the next generation, when people are trying to buy homes and get out of adolescence, and a lot of what the culture is in cities right now is a perpetual state of adolescence, is they can't get into the housing market because those prices are so artificially high. So like you get this Antifa political movement which represents a culture, which makes sense when you see that they don't understand how everything works and they can't get any sort of footing into the economy. And I'm glad that Diane brought up the Weimar Republic in the 1920s, because that's where I see that the cities are very similar to Berlin, where people, there's now, what's popular now is people are on this essentially prostitution website called OnlyFans, and it's just so that they can pay their bills. And people forget that Hitler got to power because he was the only one who was willing to clean up the degeneracy going on in Berlin and wipe the mass prostitution and actually try to protect families to a certain extent within that actual city. So the only way we can really prevent another situation from another situation like that from happening again is to look at what does Biden represent, look at what does Trump represent. At least Trump wants to bring back the United States' productive capabilities, which would allow us to overcome the debt which causes the degenerate culture, which leads to a Nazi party. And so that's how I think we can get through to people, is by addressing why they're so afraid and why they're in a culture that makes them so afraid and that they absolutely hate being a part of.
Thank you, Brandon. Diane, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'd like to very much. Well, also on the Hitler question, his party was finished earlier, and he was frankly on the brink of suicide before he became the Führer of Germany. But the Bank of England, Montague Norman, and Prescott Bush funded Hitler and the Nazis because they had a geopolitical intention, which was, you can think of the Royal Navy, but the British wanted to have the biggest military in Europe, and therefore you had to get Germany and Russia to destroy each other. And if Hitler was going to exterminate 6 million Jews and 27 million Russians and everyone else that he was committed to wiping off the face of the earth, so be it. And that's what I mean by evil, real evil, which is what Biden and company represent. I mean, just think about what else was on this laptop. Kiddie porn, pictures of Hunter or Joe or whatever with some niece who was naked or half naked or something. I mean, this is really sick, and it shows a total hatred for what mankind is. And the question is, how do you create a culture which liberates the human spirit, which liberates people's ability to be creative? And there are two aspects. One is the physical economic aspect, because obviously if you're malnourished, if you are a victim of abuse, if you don't have certain kinds of security, you'll never be able to relax enough for your mind to play, for your imagination to flourish and take root. So there's the physical aspect, and then there's the cultural aspect of this question of the science of discovery, of real happiness, of involvement in learning to play an instrument or sing, or having a chemistry set that you're doing experiments in the basement, or flying kites and learning certain physical principles of air and pressure and things like that. These are the things where people really have a chance to become geniuses. And that's what has to be fostered. And I wanted to just go back to something regarding Trump and all these wars, because there are certain things that have been quite atrocious, like the assassination of Soleimani, which really was a violation of international law. It occurred during a diplomatic mission. Pompeo boasted that he'd been trying to get Trump to do that for months, so we at least know who intended it. I don't think it's appropriate to brag about it. It was a terrible mistake. But you take Trump's expressed intention to get our troops out of Syria, not occupy the oil fields, and what Colonel Richard Black explained, which I had not realized. People may remember Defense Secretary Mattis, who has since come out attacking Trump, resigned at the time that Trump was trying to get our soldiers out of Syria. What I didn't understand is that the timing of that resignation created a break in the chain of command, which allowed Bolton, who was then National Security Advisor, to go to Tel Aviv and explicitly countermand Trump and to keep us there. So, as Daniel said, I don't think you can presume that all of these policies which were named, were Trump's intention. And I would also ask everyone to consider, why has Trump been under this spectacular, excruciating attack? You may notice the New York Times didn't attack the killing of Soleimani. But God forbid Trump would ever decide he wanted to have a meeting with President Putin of Russia to do something about limiting the number of nuclear warheads, or that Trump would meet with Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un and take a war with North Korea off the table by talking to Japan, China, South Korea. In other words, what they are reacting to, the intention of destroying a Trump presidency, is because of the potential to undermine the world order that this financial elite based in the city of London, with their tentacles here in American intelligence agencies in Wall Street and emphatically Hollywood, that there is a potential for something very great. If Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping were free to actually meet together to discuss what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Nagorno-Karabakh, what's happening in Africa with the famine crisis, what's happening between Israel and the occupied territories in Palestine. All of these things, I think that virtually every problem facing mankind could be solved without war, and not only solved, but actually lifted to a much higher plane of real economic development and growth. And that is really, it's very hard. You know, Lyndon LaRouche used to say to people that they were painfully young. And I'm not as old as Lyndon LaRouche was when he was saying that. But it's a very rough thing if you're 30 or younger in this country, or if you've only known the United States since 9/11. What you've experienced is a society which has completely lost its moral compass, a society where it's impossible to even imagine one person working 40 hours a week, being able to pay their mortgage, their health insurance, send their kids to college. College, forget it. You might as well sell all your children into slavery just to pay for it. So things are completely out of whack. They're completely unjust. The jobs that are the hardest jobs, you get paid the least for, and you end up in perpetual debt. And if you can figure out how to be a crook and rip people off, then you'll do very well. So just on who is attacking Trump and why, I think it's very important to consider that and realize that the enemies of mankind clearly see a great potential in this presidency, but it is our job to bring that to fruition. And it's our job to bring that into fruition, whoever ends up becoming the next president. But it will be far more difficult if we end up with Kamala Harris.
Queen Kamala. Let me respond again to Alan. I really appreciate what you said, Diane, and I thoroughly agree with you. But Alan, you made the point that I was not accurate for me to say that Tulsi supports the Green New Deal, that she has her own bill, which is separate, called Off Fossil Fuels. And you're certainly correct about that. When I was referring to the Green New Deal, I should have simply said to ending fossil fuels, because I really didn't mean it as particularly the bill, but rather I meant the effort to eliminate fossil fuels. I want to ask you to consider whether it is possible that the policy of eliminating fossil fuels, and for example, subsidizing wind, which is one of the things in that act, is actually totally detrimental to the economic development of the so-called third world. I believe that I could prove that to you. I believe that we sat down and we go through what it takes, what are the energy requirements to bring, the nations of Africa up to the standard that they need, such that any child could have that expression of this principle of justice to which Mr. LaRouche referred in the quote that I shared, which is that you're able to contribute to the future of mankind. I would ask you, is it really possible to lift up nations using solar and wind? Even the infamous Michael Moore put out a documentary which actually demonstrated that this is not possible. Even though I don't agree with his conclusions at all, he did demonstrate something that I think is true, that it's just not possible to run a modern economy on renewable resources, so-called. And we absolutely need to seek out nuclear fusion and nuclear fission as the next stages of mankind, where we're going to do the kind of thing that Mr. LaRouche referred to, which is we're going to increase the power per capita. You increase the power per capita to do good. With thermonuclear fusion, we can make limited resources a thing of the past. With nuclear desalination plants, we can clean up every river in the United States. There's so many things that we can accomplish, and we can fix the problems that people know exist. You can actually solve the problems of nuclear waste management. You can solve them. These are problems that can be solved. The reason that we dedicate ourselves in that direction is that these are those transformations of the power of the human species that we need if we're going to create a new paradigm where every human being gets a chance to live a life of meaning. And to return it back to my commitment to the space program and why I would like to see Tulsi touring NASA, and I mean, she should be in the next administration with Trump if he wins and do something good there. But is that I'd like to see that people understand they're working right now on a fission rocket that would take you to Mars within 3 months, which means because of the mandate of getting mankind to Mars, they are making scientific breakthroughs that are applicable on the Earth. There's a huge policy right now to run a contest to develop small nuclear reactors that will sit up on the moon. Now you have a contest to do that, and that means a bunch of smart people invest their resources and their time, and they try to generate the best designs possible. You take those small nuclear reactors, you could industrialize a country in Southeast Asia, you can industrialize a country in Africa so that they can have hospitals, so that they can have, adequate job opportunities for their people. They can have a productive economy of their own. So that they have the ability to get around and actually to have clean water. You could develop small nuclear reactors that you can just, LaRouche said, throw them out like pancakes, put them out all across the world. And right now, China and Russia are doing that. So that's my challenge to you, is that I do believe that the elimination of fossil fuels is a policy that would lead to, that is actually imposed by British imperial forces as a fraudulent policy to try to keep poor countries poor. But we can move on. Stacy has made a couple of comments. I don't think that Tulsi is a globalist. Don't worry, that's not something that I think. I think she's great, but I have criticisms or places where I'd like her to figure things out. Okay, so we have Brighton's thoughts coming up. Jay says he'd like to say something, And then we have something coming from Rose, which looks quite substantial. Let's plan to go till about 9:10 or 9:15 latest, so everyone can know we're going to conclude. But I want to give people a chance to speak if they want to speak, and it looks like we have a few people who do want to come up with some comments. So let's go to Brighton's thoughts. Hi, Brighton.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for following me on Twitter, and that's actually the reason why I decided to come onto this. But also, I was a Tulsi supporter and a former Trump supporter. But of course, I think for this election, Trump is definitely the better shot. And as you've pointed out throughout this whole this little town hall that we had, if you look, even just looked at both of the candidates, it's an absolute no-brainer. Of course, throughout the 4 years, there are many problems with Trump, but I see a lot of the current, modern left or the progressives, Rose Twitter, whatever you want to call them, and a lot of them make this justified statement in regards to Biden in thinking that, well, if we just, we elect him, we may get some radicalization from the, the modern, like the average populace, because they'll see, oh, Biden is even worse than we thought. But the thought that goes through my head is that this makes no sense. As much as if you have, problems with Trump, it's 4 more years. Has he done a lot of bad things? Yes, but it's 4 more years. Regardless if you think that the 2 main political parties are corrupt to the core and they're not reformable, the better chances of actually taking another shot at a new path for the country is a way better path, because if you get the 2024 and Biden or Harris is president at this point, they're going to just say, oh no, we have the Republican over here, and they're going to make him as the new fascist, the new Trump, and they're going to do all the scaremongering, and it's actually going to start suppressing more and more of the third party vote than we're already seeing right now. And I didn't think it'd be even possible of seeing a lot of the Green Party being taken off the ballots, even though they've complied with the election rules. So I really don't like a lot of the modern left. Well, these ones who call themselves leftists, I see them as they're more persuaded by emotion than they are looking at policy. Because yes, like I said, in terms of deportations and stuff, we've seen even from the numbers, and this is from MSNBC, so keep that in mind, that even Trump has deported less people according to ICE statistics than Obama has. And as much as we look at the wars right now, Trump is, at least, don't get me wrong, Soleimani was the last straw where I said to myself, you know what, I'm done. I'm not going to fully support him anymore at this point, unless if he really changed it around. He said, I'm going to bring the troops home right now. And we actually saw that happen, of course. But the thing is that I feel that at least he's trying. If you compare that to somebody like Obama, and now the fact that we've seen articles coming out now that Biden truly wants to put these never Trumpers into his cabinet, it's I don't understand the logic behind this, really. I can't understand why people can't at least hold their breath and say, let's give this 4 more years, then we'll have a new fresh start. And who knows, maybe Trump will turn some of this around. And I think we had the best shot of at least seeing some type of anti-war progress than we've seen in at least my lifetime of, expecting the path of a decrease of an imperialism. Of course, there's a long way to go, but it's still a lot more of a positive pathway than we've seen in the past, 20, 30 years. So that's just my take.
I really appreciate that. Please stay on the screen here for a moment. First of all, in response to what you're saying, anytime someone says, all we have to do is make it worse and then it'll get better, then you know that they're full of it. That obviously doesn't make any sense at all. So I think you can take a look at the real psychosis that's going on, the inability of people to admit what they're dealing with. I think the case of Aaron Mate is really significant, and it's kind of weird because, his dad is a famous psychologist, but he spent the past 4 years proving that Russiagate was crap and that it's being run by the CIA and the FBI to take control of the U.S. presidency. And then he's saying we should choose Biden. What? If you go with Biden, it's not a matter even of an election. Trump had a tweet today about how it's not really that I'm running against Joe Biden. I'm running against, such and such and such. And he's right about that in effect. But what's really going on is it's a coup. The coup never stopped. None of the people who were responsible for Russiagate actually went to jail. So if you don't stop the coup, if you don't think of it from those terms, then you're done, because you're never going to have another U.S. president. You're just going to have the CIA and the FBI running everything. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what people should be really forced to reckon with. Now, the thing that they always go back to is a sense of like, oh, but Trump is bad too. Oh, but. Mm-hmm. Now, the question is just, well, what's your conclusion? Because the conclusion has got to. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that. But the problem is that a lot of these people are coming from a partisan mindset. Now, it's okay to have beliefs. And of course, if there's things in terms of what Trump's done goes against your beliefs, that's fine to call out. And if that makes you uncomfortable, I totally get that. But a lot of these people, like I said, it's all coming from emotion. A lot of these people, and there's this current trend, and I don't know where this came from, but people are dictating where they lie on the political spectrum is through rhetoric and not through policy. And this is something that drives me absolutely insane. I guess I get to build upon, like you were saying, like, well, what's the end game here? If they're talking about being concerned about the environment, let's just say like this model that we've seen by 2030, we need to really get our act together by then. If not, it's over. With that being said, you realize by 2028, the Biden-Harris term would be over by its maximum extent. So we would have 2 years by then to at least get our act. Like, do you understand like where this is kind of contradicting? It's all coming from, like I said, almost like a very selfish mindset of like, oh, this person's saying bad things and I don't like it, so therefore I'm going to vote for the other guy. But there's no logic being added here. And even by the Green New Deal, if I may add on to that, because you guys were talking about that, AOC didn't even come up with the Green New Deal. It came from Thomas L. Friedman, who is corporatist billionaire and has pushed for corporatist policies in both the Democrats and Republicans. And he was saying, actually, in the New York Times article, I have it right here. This is all the way from 2007. The right rallying call is for a Green New Deal. Literally says it. The New Deal was not built on a magic bullet, but on the board of a range of programs to industrial projects to revitalize America. Ditto for the energy New Deal. If we turn the tide of climate change and end our oil addiction, we can have anything out of it. But here's the thing. This is what he says that should be in it. Solar, wind, hydro, ethanol, biodiesel, clean coal, and nuclear power and conversion. So with that being said, this is all coming from the brainchild of, that's a talking point that is kind of just being passed on to AOC. And then we're starting to see that, oh, it's really just a talking point just to sheepdog more funds and to keep this dying party alive. They're not actually going to implement it. If they actually did care about the environment, they would look at the OFF Act, which Tulsi already proposed within Congress. But of course, that gets overshadowed because they're more interested in a talking point that was, sorry.
Let me respond to that. I appreciate what you're bringing up. First of all, I would agree with your characterization that the Green New Deal is essentially a corporatist policy. Yeah. It's an austerity policy. Mm-hmm. I would emphasize that it is Malthusian, which is the whole British imperial policy the United States has been fighting against. We're organized around the idea that you need to reduce the number of people in the world because people are bad for the environment. Mm-hmm. And more people is bad and more people is bad. And that is only possible if you assume that the human mind doesn't exist. Because the human mind makes breakthroughs in science and technology, and we overcome our limitations. We always do. And people who say that you don't do that we can't do that, they're simply deeply cynical about the nature of the human mind and the human species. So secondly, I would say, I think we need to have a further event sometime into the future after the election to discuss among Tulsi supporters, well, no, I don't mean just exactly that, but I mean to talk about amongst people who are sort of anti-establishment, independent, and others, the matter of the global warming claims, because this whole thing is pushed down from Michael Bloomberg, Prince Charles, the Club of Rome, and Lyndon LaRouche has been fighting against that for decades. And I have a lot more to say about that, about why eliminating fossil fuels is not an appropriate goal and would kill a lot of people. But let me urge the following and then move on, which is, because we're going to wrap up relatively soon. I want to ask you to work with me, Brighton, at least on a particular issue. We need to build an intelligentsia. we need to build a culture of people, millennial and younger, and particularly among youth, who are actually capable of thinking through the big challenges. And that's something that I'm working on with a group of other people, and Diane is part of that as well, where we're going to youth and we're saying, work with us to study the great minds of human history, from Leibniz, Shakespeare, also the work of Lyndon LaRouche, Hamilton, Franklin, and Abraham Lincoln, discover what actually caused these breakthroughs to happen, not just in our culture, but in others as well. And I think that's going to be necessary for changing this deeply irrational behavior that you're describing. So I'll be in touch with you. I'll let you know what we're up to. And if you can join us, then I encourage you to do.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you, Brighton. All right. So we have a question here or a comment from my friend Harrison. And then we also had Jay wanted to say something. So why don't we take those two? And if there's anything else, please speak up. That would be absolutely fine. But before we sorry?
Sorry. I meant to have you finish what you were going to say.
Yeah, if you could wait, Harrison, because actually Jay had his hand up first, or he commented they wanted to ask a question. But let me say something before we go further. We've had a number of discussions here. I want to reemphasize, I'm asking you to deeply consider this question about what you can do to prevent Obama 3. My hypothesis is that it demands that you back Trump and convince other people to do it too. But I don't say that from the standpoint of saying Trump is someone that you're going to support because of what he has done, but rather because of what you're going to do. And that may sound like a kind of a rhetorical flourish, but I genuinely mean it. We're going to have to build an independent-minded organization of people or movement of people who will not be swayed by the pessimism and the cynicism of the professional left-wing pundits or anti-war pundits, but will actually take up the baton in terms of leading the country. I really genuinely think Tulsi Gabbard is one of those people. I can actually trust her judgment and trust her intention. But I know that something is demanded of me by history, and I'm seeking to carry it out. And I know that Diane operates on exactly the same basis. And I'm inviting you to participate with me in that process by which we discover what is needed, and you fight for it, and you build the culture of people who will do something about it. And I think that that means not merely an anti-war policy. That's really not sufficient at all. We need a pro-development policy. We need a conception of a solution of a realm in which US, Russia, China can collaborate. And I want to strongly urge you to consider that this matter of solving the famine in Africa is the critical, important thing for us to do. This is something that Mrs. Helga Zepp-LaRouche has been very forward about in leading a discussion about how to change the relationship between the great powers. If you want to stop the China stuff, if you want to get a good hit onto Steve Bannon and knock him off of his pedestal and his whole anti-China crap, then you're going to have to come up with not merely some kind of a rah-rah against it, but actually a solution concept. And this is one of those that I believe exists. So let's go to hear from Jay, and then from Harrison, and then we'll probably conclude then at around 9:10 or so.
James,
And
Diane, everyone, thank you so much for your time. My name is Jay, and I just want to touch on some fundamental points. Daniel, in a lot of ways, I agree with you. However, fundamentally, there are a lot of things at large, not just you, that I disagree with strategy. And it's because we have a lot of issues with definition. We don't have things clearly defined, and so we cannot move forward. So to pause on that, I agree with you that, I do not want another reinstitution of George Bush Sr. or what you call Obama 3. We had enough of that. We've got a little break. Do I want Trump around? No. But at the same time, did he try to pump the brakes in Syria? Yeah, he did. got pressured into it by the MSM because of the DNC, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone knows who's here probably. My point on that is that what we do is we're looking at all these facts and all these truths. And what we do is we interpolate the two as though they're the same thing when they're not. The truth is based upon the fundamentals of belief. Facts are based upon evidence. And as people move forward in drawing their conclusions, they're not distinguishing between the two. They're taking these emotionalities because they are not looking at how they are defined. And so, as a part of this next thing that I'm going to mention, it's important to bear that in mind, because these are the people who we're dealing with as we communicate and we're trying to educate and share this information so that they can awaken. We have to be mindful of why there are these fallacies to begin with, which even we're, of course, subject to. But it's important to remember why we fail moving forward so that we can address others and gain momentum. What we look at across the whole, when you talk about a paradigm shift, and I'm just using this as an example because many people, of course, lay out their paradigms as they see fit. Where I personally feel that we have a huge major strategic flaw is paradigm, as opposed to paradigmata, where we have stratagem sets, where we don't say, hey, look, we need to not get off of fossil fuels. We need to get off of fossil fuels. We need to have people who are impassioned in their area. They need to be able to draw their idea sets, draw other people who are impassioned and communicative so that they can have their own cell that communicates with other cells. And as we communicate and draw a shared common interest of yielding power back to the people, there's no central head. We are all individual. We can all group. We can eventually form additional parties. I'm not calling them third because it suggests one or two more, but it allows for the pluralism to grow their own pluralisms, which are essentially, from a narrative perspective, the main of society looking at the gremlins. Now, a lot of people in the 80s look at the gremlins like, hear me out on this final point. The gremlins being, okay, they're evil, they're violent, but they're reptilian. And just as the powers that be want us to behave in their mannerisms, reptiles will be what they are. And they deserve their own frame of moving forward. So with that, I'm drawing back.
Okay, I know Diane has something to say.
Yeah. Go ahead. Or can I go?
Please.
Oh, good. Well, I wanted to bring up something that I think you should consider, which is apparently there's an asteroid which is 300 meters in diameter, which is going to be passing between the Earth and our satellites. That is a very, very near pass in the year 2029. And then it's going to make a loop, and it's actually scheduled to collide with the Earth in the year 2068. Right now, if this were to happen next year, there would be absolutely nothing we could do about it. And an asteroid of that size at least would eliminate an entire continent, if not half the planet. Probably what caused the dinosaurs to go extinct 66 million years ago, and it wasn't just the dinosaurs, but 99% of all species on the planet, was a huge asteroid that smashed into the Earth. I've read where the Gulf of Mexico is, I think, because the heat, the impact, the crater that changes the weather, it changes everything. Now, that's an actual real threat which is looming, which has nothing to do with all of these constructs that human beings have created, parties, nations, you name it. So the question I would ask is, how do we get from where we are right now with these silly divisions among people on this planet and in our own nation to become a species which is actually capable of making sure that in the year 2068, this thing doesn't just come and wipe out everything we ever thought of, everything we considered precious. And I would also add that there are probably millions of meteors and asteroids that we haven't detected. Hopefully one is not coming at a super high speed and we discover it too late. I mean, this is an urgent question that we absolutely should be working on. And I think we have to kind of take it out of all of the frameworks that we tend to take for granted and think from the future backwards, which is what would it take, what is required of us as a species to ensure that at least by 2068, better by 2030 or 2029 if we can do it, since we don't really know for sure, nothing's going to hit us sooner, that we're able to deal with this. So that's what your question made me think about.
Thank you very much, Diane. I totally agree. I totally agree. We have to figure out what is the character of the human species that can solve planet endangering problems like that, surely. And it takes.
That makes sense. But the thing is that if we have this wall from the government as it stands, dividing us for their own interests, as opposed to these different mechanisms, which we are all communicating, and would, as we communicate more and more people awake, then we're more working together. So when we have this threat, we can discuss with each other and force the powers that be to move in our agenda focus versus.
Jay, well, look, we don't. Hold on. I don't want to. Let me put you in a different frame of mind. We are not trying to influence people and win friends, right? What we want to do, and I'm speaking to you as a member of we, is to take power. You want to take power. That's the issue. And I don't mean from the standpoint of some, lame kind of like revolt against the government or something like that. What I'm talking about is there is a problem that you're referring to, and you're sort of treating it as though it's a generalized problem of governments or relationships between people. And I would disagree with you.
I absolutely am not. I want to be clear that I feel that is a huge threat. I don't want to end up like the dinosaurs. I certainly don't want my nephew to. What I'm talking about is communication to work together, and without.
Yeah, but you said that like governments stand between us, or that that there's such a thing as the powers that be that we have to deal with. And I'm suggesting to you the following: there is a imperial system. It is sensual. You can go and figure out what is it. It has certain principles by which it operates, and it is an absolute danger to humanity. And that is the system that is known as City of London and Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, and increasingly Silicon Valley. And if we're going to do something about it, you got to have a weapon. You got to have a sword, and you got to plunge it into the belly of the beast. And the sword that we have is Glass-Steagall, national banking, and massive increases in productive jobs across the world, which is going to require a certain new agreement around the nature of the financial architecture in the world called a new Bretton Woods. And this is a subject I would like to discuss with you, because I understand sort of the general area from which you're posing your question. But I am adherent to the idea of leadership, which is to say, if we define a specific outcome that we demand, that we need, according to certain principles of how the world works, how the universe works, that we can pursue that to the point of victory.
No, what I'm suggesting is that as opposed to forming one structure where it can be attacked by bribe or by strategy, whatnot, that we have a pluralization of pluralizations of that.
I think that's.
It's still the same people who want to survive. They're just harder to hit as a target.
I appreciate your comments, Jay, but I think that we've properly defined our disagreement. I don't agree with the kind of anarcho, kind of syndicalist outlook or something like that.
Whoa, I'm no,
Different
I
cell.
assure you, I'm no anarchist. I just want to be clear on that.
Oh, forgive me, Jay. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I don't want to. But I think the issue is leadership, and it's not so much sort of the other elements that you're putting forward. And I think leadership can be conveyed in particular ways that have a cultural effect. They include classical music, I think, is a very powerful tool to knit people together, and especially big missions for the nation. And people will respond to that and change their culture and change their ability to communicate with each other because of something absolutely beautiful and noble that is done before their eyes. Like when you see an American walk on the moon, and it hasn't been done for over 50 years, it changes who you are inside, and it allows you to discuss with other people as opposed to being trapped by your culture, as our friend Brandon was commenting. I'd like to ask if we could move forward, Jay. I really appreciate you being
No,
involved.
absolutely. I've monopolized far too much time as it is. We have our disagreements, we have our agreements, and at the end of the day, that's really where it lies. And I really wish you the best
Okay,
of luck to your campaign.
we'll figure out how to work together one way or another. Okay,
we can
Harrison,
now.
please come ahead. And we have still 2 more comments in the chat. So as soon as those come out, we'll talk about them. Go ahead, please.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
So I have a question or a statement to Mr. Brighton here when he talked about, let's see, why do people want to make things worse? Why do they ascribe to this idea that's often called accelerationism? Why? Why do they want to make things worse? I mean, I don't know. On Twitter, I see a lot of people on Rose Twitter. I see a lot of people like, who are, there are even people who are like just, they're straight up dyed-in-the-wool Nazis like Richard Spencer. And they're all in for Biden because, well, he's going to make things worse. He's going to, he's such a horrible, I mean, they know he's terrible. But why do they want, I mean, ask yourself, what is the logic behind that? Why do you want to have America go into just collapse, and and that's that. What's the end game there? That's something I would ask myself. And I wouldn't talk to Richard Spencer. That guy's way out there. But some of your some of the Rose Twitter people, I would talk to and tell them, some of the Bernie bros, they might be open to some reason there. And the last thing you want in any society, is a civil war. Now, in my church, the priest actually gave us a warning about how a civil war is possible in the United States if certain things don't go in a certain way and people don't resolve their differences. We don't want that. That's chaos. We cannot operate in chaos. So, Brian, that would be something I would think about, and maybe even bring up with some of your contacts. And I would also recommend that other people in the Tulsi camp also do that. And that's my statement for right now. I don't want to take up too much time.
Well, I appreciate that, Harrison. I appreciate that. I want to go to one more thought that came forward, which is from Todd Waitzig. Thank you for participating, Harrison. He says, may I ask a question about immigration? How can Tulsi supporters work with Trump to improve our immigration policy? Now, this is a wonderful note to end on because I think that Diane and I have a very optimistic way to answer this question. I mean, the whole issue has been that people are leaving their nations in droves. They're escaping the policy of globalization. When I lived in Dallas, first of all, my family is immigrant, like almost everyone, not recently, but my family came from Mexico. My other side of my family came from Ireland and faced enormous challenges to get to this country and to participate in this country. And why did they do that? Because things were in terrible conditions where they came from. 1841 is when my family came over from Ireland, around the same time as John Kennedy's and many, many other people, because there was a genocide being imposed upon Ireland by the British, by Queen Victoria, who toured the country and complained about the plight of having to look at the white chimpanzees suffering so terribly. She not because she cared about them, because she thought they were animals and deserved to be put through a kind of an extinction program. And they left. The average age of people who came into the New England from Ireland, the average lifespan, in other words, was 13 years old, because they came across the ocean, many of them without even a blanket. They died enormous numbers. Now, what's happening is the same thing. The nations of Mexico, the nations of Iberoamerica have been applied, and they've been given a genocide policy. And the name of the genocide policy is globalization. The concept is, of course, you take your productive capability in your nation, and then, well, not you, of course, but the international financial oligarchy takes that, and they say, we're going to take those jobs and we're going to put them in another country where we can exploit them and pay them pennies. And we're not going to compensate for the problem that happens in the nation where the jobs leave, nor are we going to build the appropriate infrastructure to actually lift up the economy of the country where the jobs arrive. They're just going to treat people as essentially slaves, as animals. And that's what's been done, like the famous case of the maquiladores in Mexico. Or you may have read these stories about skeleton drivers, the people who drive the half-finished trucks across Mexico from one factory to another. Totally insane treatment of the population. And this has been imposed by the IMF, by the World Bank. It's been imposed by the major financial actors in the world who run their system, which is an imperial system, through the offshore banking system. They run their system through the complete manipulation of the U.S. government up until this point, around, since John Kennedy and before that Franklin Roosevelt, or since 1999 when the Glass-Steagall was repealed. That's another important point. They control the ability to get whatever they want to do, to have total reign to do what they want to do, to build enormous speculative bubbles built on cannibalizing the productive capabilities of the world. And if we want Trump to have a humane immigration policy, which of course we do, and I think he wants that absolutely as well, then we have to do the kind of thing he talked about at the United Nations General Assembly about 2 years ago, when he spoke and he said, I want America first, and I want every other country to be first for their nation. He said specifically, he wants people not to have to leave. But if you're going to do that, then you have to change the whole character of the system. That's my point. You have to make agreements, which is something that Lyndon LaRouche was working on at an incredible level. He was meeting with Lopez Portillo, Indira Gandhi. He met with top leaders of the major nations of the world. Lopez Portillo was president of Mexico. Indira Gandhi was prime minister of India at the time. And then LaRouche was put in prison. Robert Mueller was the leading prosecutor on that case, and it was enforced by the Bush family, by Kissinger, and by British intelligence. And they said that LaRouche was a Russian agent. So, sound familiar? But the point is, there are specific policies that can be implemented. Agreements between nations to have fixed exchange rates, so you don't get enormous, manipulation of the lesser party by causing their currency to crash in value. We have to have long-term agreements about building up large-scale infrastructure. We should be building high-speed trains that go from here down all the way to the tip of South America. Right now, there's a gap between North and South America called the Darien Gap, which absolutely could be bridged. There's no train that goes across that. And these are the types of big policies, as well as the major construction of new power plants, all types of things that are needed. Hospitals, emphatically, in the immediate time period, that could actually reverse the problems of globalization, where we're going to increase the powers of our economies. And so I would invite you to study this with me and to work on this to see some of the material that I will continue to put out from my Twitter about how we can implement such a policy in the world. All right, so we went longer and longer and longer than we meant to, so I will stop here and invite, I'm going to make a brief statement and invite Diane to make one as well. And I encourage you to, if you're in New Jersey, of course, vote for me. And if you're in New York, then you got to start working with Diane. And no matter what, let's stay in touch and let's work together. And let's actually investigate these principles of what we're going to do. And I'm asking you to mobilize now to back the president so that we can break the coup. I want you to imagine that you are landing on the moon in 2024, and that you look back on the planet and you see the human species before you. You know, what is that human species? What is it that causes us to have the ability to take ourselves like no other species can and place ourselves on another body in the universe, another heavenly body, so to speak? What gives us the ability to do that? It is the individual human mind acting on the basis of a passion for all of humanity that gives us the ability to do that. That's my strong belief. I think that there is a potential here for people to wake up to the optimistic potentials of the world, and that they're going to do that by looking at the US presidency and saying, wait a second, this thing is not controlled. Wait a second, there's a human being in that chair. And that man, I could work with him because, of course, he works for us. And if we have that kind of conception today, if many people do, and I think if you look at Trump's rallies, obviously a lot of people have that conception, and then inject into that certain understandings about the nature of these agreements that should be made on an economic basis, certain concepts about what are the central ways that we could collaborate with Russia and China instead of treating them as enemies. What does the future hold for 25 or 50 years? How do you reconstruct Syria and Yemen? Do you know how you're going to do that? I would venture to say that you have to personally know how to do it if you're going to go around and say, I'm against the war. If you really are saying, I'm taking responsibility for the people of Syria, then what are you going to do about it? What should they do? How are you going to feed them? How are you going to clothe them? How are you going to make sure that that's possible for them to do for themselves? Which, of course, is the point. I think you have to take into account the affirmative conception of what we want the world to be, how we want it to look, what are the tools by which we can make that happen. And that's what I'm inviting you to do with the LaRouche movement, with myself as a representative of that movement, with Diane as well, and with many others. So I hope you'll stay involved with this and continue to, attend events like this online, and otherwise read articles, share them, and fight back against the cynicism. So thank you. Diane, please take the last word.
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, Daniel, thanks very much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here and to work with you. And I know our collaboration will be continuing and intensifying. Yes, actually, 2022 is the 100th anniversary of the birth of Lyndon LaRouche. So it's a special year. And I would hope that by that time we would get LaRouche exonerated, which I think is a definite possibility for a second Trump term. I also think what's possible, remember when Trump was about to come in, and one of the main reasons I chose to run against Schumer is that Trump said he wanted to reorganize the intelligence agencies, and Schumer threatened him. He said, that's a stupid idea. They have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you, which is exactly what they've been doing. What I would like to say to everyone who's listening, and I'm really glad that you're here, is to try and imagine what the world, if we'll take 2068 as a deadline, what this planet and other planets we may have colonized by then would look like for us to be in a situation where we are able to stop asteroids from hitting the Earth and wiping all of us out, what that would mean in terms of the standard of living, our ability to harness the resources that we have, new discoveries and forms of energy, what the human life should be like. Because again, I just want to reiterate that For people alive today, whether you're in your 30s, 40s, or younger, struggling to exist, what you've been handed is completely unjust. It's totally criminal. And it is not natural for human beings to be enslaved to a financial system. We created the system, we can change it. And there should be a schedule where people can be engaged in careers which are productive, which are changing their future, which require you to use your mind, and a great deal of leisure time where you are developing your powers of creativity, whether it's in music, art, science, other things that you love. And I think we can get there, and I think we can get there in our lifetimes, but it requires, as Jose said at the beginning, no one can be a spectator. Everyone has to be involved in this. And I would urge you to work with us. And as Daniel said, do everything you can to get Trump reelected, because I'm not sure that the alternative is a survivable proposition.
Oh, okay. There. Thank you really very much, Diane. Goodbye, everyone. Stay with us on Twitter. Let me know what you think. Make a comment on Twitter. I'll send out a little tweet saying, what do you think? So people know what you actually learned or what you thought about, including the disagreements. I want to continue to have that discussion. And we'll be in touch. We'll talk soon. Okay. And hopefully we in a week, we're in a slightly more optimistic standpoint. That would be really, or even a much more optimistic point of view, which is really what I think. So take care, everyone. Good night.
Have a good one.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Night.